Welcome to Church in the Time of the Virus. I believe we are up to episode 14 now. And today's episode is brought to us by Carey Waldie, who is a friend and fellow pastor here in Traverse City. He wrote a blog post this last week, and I think it says so many things that I want to say. So with no further ado, here is our contribution from Carey. Dear American Christians, first, I want to acknowledge that as a pastor, these are challenging times for us. We're not used to quarantines, pandemics, and the government making rules that affect our worship. It can look very similar to some kind of religious persecution. But I would humbly submit to you that it is not. I have pastored in America for over 30 years now, but I also have extensive missions experience in various countries, most of which the gospel is restricted, banned, and outright illegal. I have led teams to help underground churches, evangelized the unreached, and plowed intercessory furrows in hardened, spiritually dry soil. I'm not saying that to boast, but rather to help you understand that I think I can recognize spiritual persecution when I see it. I've been detained, interrogated, and worked through real fear as I stood outside a foreign prison's walls, wondering if I would spend some of my life there because of the work I was doing. But my life is different than those who live and worship in these countries. I was able to come back to America. I love America. We're facing a real challenge, but we're not being religiously persecuted. Why do I say that? For one big reason. We are not being singled out because of our faith. The authorities are singling us out because the nature of our gatherings can lend itself to mass infections. We gather in close proximity. We love to touch. We sing, cough, sneeze, lay hands to pray, all while having the time of our lives. We know the power of gathering together. But we're not singled out because of the God we worship. If the schools begin meeting and the Christian churches are banned, this might be persecution. If the movie theaters can open and Christian churches are restricted, this might be persecution. If the bars and casinos can operate freely and Christian churches cannot, this would be religious persecution. If our Bibles are confiscated, our hymnals burned, if you still have hymnals, and our leaders imprisoned, that would qualify. But Pastor, aren't you worried that they might use this crisis to keep Christians from what? From living missionally? I would submit to you that the biggest threat to the Christian church in America is not the government, but our own apathy toward the things of God. Do we miss gathering because of the entertainment factor or because it keeps us from being missional? Could it be that the American church is overly entertained and underly challenged? We will fill stadiums for concerts while churches sit nearly empty for prayer meetings. And most believers will never lead anyone to Jesus in their lifetime. Some now think that sharing your faith is wrong because it's imposing your beliefs on another. Cherishing our rights is best displayed by how much we use them when we have them, not by how much we protest when they're temporarily restricted. Nothing that has occurred during this quarantine has kept us from praying, from loving God, from loving our neighbor, or even complaining on social media. Nobody has taken my Bible, silenced my voice, or taken me to jail. No man can ever put us in a place where we cannot obey God and glorify Him. How we respond to this crisis will speak volumes to the world around us. Is our attitude firmly planted in God's goodness and sovereignty? I personally struggle with not being able to meet. The reason I don't lead my church into gathering is a fear-based decision, I will admit, but not fear of the virus. I fear being a bad neighbor. I fear those I am called to reach will not revere my decision to take a stand, but rather think I don't care about them or their loved ones. One of our 4 medical workers that we support serves as a physician among many different kinds of people. She laments at the Christian response to the pandemic. Quote, I have had more non-Christian friends turn further away from God during this time because the vitriolic conspiracy theory, I can do what I want yelling at people for my rights, Christians on Facebook and in person, all while hoping this was a time they would turn to Him for hope. Our church is in the middle of a multi-million-dollar building project. The quarantine has set us back. Just yesterday, some workers returned. Our team talked with them, and one of the men began to open up about his wife who is struggling with cancer and the lengths he must go to protect her and their young family. Our team prayed with him as tears streamed down this tough laborer's face. He said, "You'll never know how much this meant to me." These are the people we are trying to reach. Those who don't understand our religious freedom because they're bound in spirit. Let's bring them to Jesus first, then share about this privilege we have to freely worship him. This resonates with me on a lot of levels. I've been thinking a lot this week about our concerns about what our freedoms are in a lot of different ways. And it strikes me that there's one thing I know I'm always free to do, and that's love my neighbor. I don't have any control over what President Trump orders or Governor Whitmer orders. I don't have any control about when businesses open back up or how people can shop. Those things are not in my control. What is in my control? I can still love God and love my neighbor. I can worship God in spirit and in truth, as the Bible says, and I can worship God by being obedient. Isn't the Bible clear about that? That obedience is even better than sacrifice, to quote the Old Testament. So what can I do right now as a Christian that's faithfully present in culture? I can love God and I can love my neighbor. I want to revisit what Carey's missionary friend said, this idea that she's getting messages from people that right now the church is pushing people further away from Christ rather than bringing them closer. Reminded me of what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 8 and 9. He's addressing an issue in the church where people had conflict over whether or not they could eat meat that was offered to idols. And Paul walks them through that, and he says, yeah, some people have better ideas on this than others do. Some of you are right and some of you are wrong. But what does it look like to get along? And he says at the end of chapter 8, if any type of food is an issue that causes my brothers and sisters to fall away from God, then God forbid I should ever eat it again, so that I would never be the crack, the rise, or the rock on the road that causes them to stumble. Then he starts out the next chapter by saying, am I not truly free? Am I not an emissary of Christ? Others don't recognize this, he says, but you do. So then he talks about his freedom. He talks about things he should be allowed to do as a minister of the gospel that he doesn't do. And even though no one except Jesus owns me, I have become a slave by my own free will to everyone in hopes that I would gather more believers. When around Jews, I emphasize my Jewishness to win them over. When around those who live strictly under the law, I live by its regulations, even though I have a different perspective on the law now. But I do this to win them over. In the same way, I've made a life outside the law to gather those who live outside the law, even though I personally abide by and live under the law. I've been broken, lost, depressed, oppressed, and weak, that I might find favor and then gain the weak, that is, the spiritually weak. I'm flexible, adaptable, and able to do and be whatever is needed for all kinds of people, so that in the end I can use every means at my disposal to give them the message of salvation. I do it all for the gospel and for the hope that I may participate with everyone who is blessed by the proclamation of the good news. This is my hope, that we as a church can embrace this challenge right now. What does it look like to be all things to all people? What does it look like to surrender our freedoms in the service of others? And especially if the exercise of freedoms are putting a stumbling block between people who need to hear the gospel and their ability to hear it. God forbid that we indulge ourselves in things that are putting roadblocks on the way to the cross. If wearing a face mask is a witness, I'll wear a face mask. If practicing social distancing is a witness, I'll social distance. If we have to open church up with every caution in place so that the message is clear that we value the health of the community and that we're all in this together, and it breaks down barriers so that people don't see the church as opposition or enemy, but they see the church as for them, oh yeah, then that's my plan. I mean, isn't the Bible clear? The cross will be the stumbling block. I mean, that's hard for people, right? That's the thing that if someone's going to stumble on the way to the cross, I don't want them to stumble till they get there. If there's something within my power where I can remove those types of oppositions. And man, I feel like this time is prime opportunity. There's a witness on the line here. We can have strong political opinions, and that's fine. We can have strong feelings about, as American citizens, what's happening to our culture. Well, we have to crack down in times like this. I get it. But what I have to come back to once again is, all right, I'm not most interested in supporting America. I am more interested in supporting the church. That's the gospel mission that my life is credited to. If I can do both of those things, cool, because I like the vision of America in many, many ways. But at the end of the day, you ask me which one I am most interested in furthering, that's the message of the gospel. I want to see the kingdom of the church built. And if there are ways that my response as a Christian right now are pushing people away from Christians and from the church and making it even harder for them to hear the message of the gospel, God forbid that I participate in that. God forbid that you participate in that. It's about the kingdom. It's about Christ. It's more important than anything else.